Hello, how you doing and welcome back to the channel. Will George Ford play against Wales this weekend in Cardiff? That was probably the headline inclusion from Steve Borthwick's training squad for that match against Wales this weekend in the Six Nations. That was released yesterday. There's also some other interesting names included, some players dropping out as well. So in this video, I'm just going to be looking ahead to that game and asking, will George Ford play a part at all? I'll also go into some of those other names that aren't there as well. So if you have an opinion on this, and normally most people do when it comes to England selection, drop a comment down below. Let me know what you think about George Ford, about any of the other names that I mentioned. Like the video and subscribe to the channel as well. Make sure you stay up to date with everything that's getting posted. All right, let's get into it. So George Ford is the headline inclusion. Had a really bad injury in the Premiership final last season playing for Leicester Tigers. He's only just come back really. He's played in the Premiership Cup. He came off the bench in Sale's defeat to Northampton in the weekend in the Premiership as well, but he hasn't had much rugby really at all. So are we going to see him play for England in Cardiff? Honestly, I don't know. I hope we don't. I hope this is an inclusion just to gradually bring him back into the England fold, because I think, particularly considering Steve Borthwick was the director of rugby at Leicester last season when they went on that run to the Premiership title, even though Ford got injured in that final, he was so crucial to how good they were throughout the campaign. So Borthwick knows what George Ford can do really, really well. I think in terms of an out-and-out fly half, he is as good at reading the game, his intelligence, as England possibly have. But I think it's probably a little bit too soon to certainly see him starting, but even to see him coming off the bench, I think would be a little bit premature in my opinion. However, I think the fact that he's been included is very, very interesting. So is this a selection that Steve Borthwick is thinking about the Wales game, or is it a selection which is thinking about the World Cup later this year in France? Because I definitely think George Ford will have a role to play for England. Then, of course, he's been sidelined by Eddie Jones over the last couple of years. Eddie Jones opted for the Owen Farrell, Marcus Smith axis. George Ford dropped out of the England squad, so he is coming back in. But I think from this, George Ford still has an international future. I always find it interesting. I was looking at sort of the comments on social media and things when England put out this 36-player squad, and a lot of them on George Ford, and a lot of people kind of complaining about his inclusion, which always surprises me, because as a fly half, he is absolutely brilliant. How is he going to fit into that system would be another question, because obviously Owen Farrell is the captain, you would imagine isn't getting dropped. So does that mean it's back to Ford and Farrell? I think that would be a shame, given the fact that we finally seem to have maybe fallen upon a centre partnership with Ollie Lawrence at 12 and Slade or whoever else at 13 that could work for England going forward. But the point is, I think George Ford has some role to play in England going forward. I just don't necessarily think that it should be this weekend against Wales, but we'll wait and see. Let's see what Borthwick goes for. But I'm sure a lot of you are going to have an opinion on that, so do drop a comment down below. Elsewhere, in terms of the ins that I mentioned, some of these guys have been in the squads already and then dropped out, come back in, so on and so forth. But Courtney Lawes and Tom Curry, they are both back. They are fit. They are ready to play if called upon. You've also got Ben Youngs back in, Fraser Dingwall and Caden Murley as well. So firstly, on Courtney Lawes and Tom Curry, I think the England back row is one of the hardest areas of the team to select at the moment. Ludlam, I think, has been brilliant in the opening 2 rounds of the Six Nations. Jack Willis was excellent against Italy. Dombrandt, there seems to be the jury out on a little bit. I don't think people have been too impressed with his performances, but I think he's been adopting a different role to what we see him do with Harlequins, where he pops up in the outside channels and has more space. I think it's probably been a little bit more of that kind of grunt work, the hard work that doesn't or isn't as flashy that he's probably been doing for England so far in the Six Nations. So that is interesting. Tom Curry is just so good that it's hard not to put him back in, particularly if you saw his performance against Northampton. He was really, really impressive. But who do you drop? I don't know who you get rid of. Jack Willis, Ludlam, they've both been so good. Courtney Lawes is the one I'm not quite sure on, because he hasn't played as much. I know Tom Curry hasn't had loads of rugby, but Courtney Lawes has been out for a long, long time, has very little under his belt. So maybe coming off the bench, but then you've got to sacrifice someone from your bench. I guess he does give you a second row, back row option. And also remember when Courtney Lawes pulled out of England's squad before we'd even played a game in the Six Nations, it was a second row that was called up to replace him. So maybe Steve Borthwick sees him as more of a second row. We will wait and see, but I'm not sure I'd put Courtney Lawes straight back in at this moment in time. Ben Youngs comes back into the training squad. I'm disappointed in that, as brilliant as he has been, as a phenomenal career as he's had for England. I think we have better options at scrum half. I've documented that on the channel pretty regularly. Fraser Dingwall, I think, is an interesting option, another good potential option at centre for England. Whether he gets a chance, I'm not so sure, but I think that's quite a good selection to have in that squad. And then Caden Murley, Harlequins fans will be calling out for it. Surely he needs to be given an opportunity, but again, for who? We're not too sure. Just in terms of the players that have dropped out of the squad, Ben Curry no longer there. Obviously, he didn't play following the Scotland game. Manu Tuilagi picked up a red card this weekend, so you'd imagine that his Six Nations is probably going to be over, which I think is probably a blessing in disguise. I don't think Manu Tuilagi's England career is necessarily over, but I think just in that Italy game with Ollie Lawrence coming through, and we're seeing the benefits of not being so obsessed with Manu Tuilagi. So I think maybe not having him for this Six Nations from an England perspective is a positive thing, but Tuilagi himself looked pretty gutted when he came off the pitch. Ollie Hassell-Collins as well has dropped out from, I saw the Times reporting this morning that that's due to a knee injury. So that would explain it, because I thought that was quite a harsh decision. But if it's due to injury, then it makes more sense. And then Johnny Hill as well. Again, he hasn't been called back up. I haven't seen too many people pointing that out. He played for Sale at the weekend, so I don't know whether he picked up an injury or not. But it looks like at the moment, Ollie Chessum, Maro Itoje, that seems to be England's second row pairing, where previously it was very much Maro Itoje and Johnny Hill. So that's something that is certainly worth keeping an eye on. In terms of the wing selection, given that Ollie Hassell-Collins isn't there, as I say, I thought it was harsh, but it's an injury, so it makes more sense. Obviously, you've got Caden Murley, you've got Tommy Freeman, Henry Arundel as well. After his impact off the bench, could we see him starting? I think that might be quite likely, because he automatically gives England a lot more pace in a back three, which I do think they're lacking. So yeah, look, there's options there. Anthony Watson is another one. I think, again, it's going to be very intriguing to see what Steve Borthwick does with his squad this week. I think there's certain areas of the team which kind of pick themselves, but I think the back row is difficult. What does he do at scrum half? Is it Jack Van Portfleet again? Does Alex Mitchell get a go? I'd like to see Mitchell certainly at least given more game time off the bench. I'd happily see him starting. And then fly half is going to be the big one. George Ford, is he there to be included on a regular basis? Or is it more of a mind of getting him back in, getting him into the environment, seeing what England are doing so that he can come in either later in the Championship or later heading towards the World Cup, and he has a good idea of the shape, the patterns, the attack, all that sort of stuff. So as I said already, do let me know what you think in the comments. I'm going to do a video tomorrow, probably on Tuesday, where I'm going to select my England 23 to face Wales in Cardiff this weekend. But let me know what you think in the comments down below. Always love to hear from you. And as always, see you in the next one.